Hello, this is your host, Christina from Savvy Radio. Thank you for joining us for our Heartbeat of the World video series, where we're bringing you some of the top experts around the globe to talk about some of the greatest challenges facing our country and the world. Our guest today is Stephen L. Hayes, Chairman and President of Fairtax.org. As a self-described recovering tax attorney, he spent considerable time and resources investigating alternatives to the income tax. Based on his research, including interviewing tax practitioners, business owners, employees, and economists, he determined the best solution was to eliminate income tax and the IRS and replace them with a national retail sales tax collected by the states. Our second guest is Jon Graver, Treasurer at Fairtax.org. Prior to joining Fairtax.org, Jon was Senior Vice President of Giuliani Partners, founded by our former New York City Mayor, Rudolph Giuliani. Some fun facts about Jon: he rode his bike from New York to Montreal and survived the SEAL physical training course. Find out more about Fairtax at Fairtax.org. Hi, Steve. Welcome to Savvy Business Radio for our Heartbeat of the World video series. It's wonderful to have you here today. How are you?
I'm doing great, Christina. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. Well, today we're not on video, we're on a call, but I'm so grateful to have you. You are the chairman of Fairtax.org, and it's a wonderful group looking to actually change the way we are structuring our taxes right now. And I actually heard about it recently, the idea of it, which sounds fabulous. I would not have to spend all these hours every year trying to figure out how to do my taxes if we implemented something like this. And I think it would be better for the entire country. But before we go to all that, share with the audience a little bit about your background and what brought you into law and then inevitably brought you into working with Fairtax.org.
Well, I was back a long time ago when it was legal. I was a tax attorney, and I did a lot of work with high-income people who were beset at that point with 70+% taxes, and we found tax shelters and different things. And I, as a younger person, had a lot of fun running around a good part of the world doing these types of things, and it was quite fun. And then as I continued with it, though, Christina, one of the things that I noticed was every time that we were working on something totally legal, the IRS would come in and say, you can't do that. And we would show them where we could. And then they would go to DC and they'd change the law. And it became a situation where we were like, being crowded into smaller and smaller areas, And I also began to realize that all of this effort and all this money and time was being spent not really for any benefit except, moving some dollars around. And I know that's part of the business world, is you want to make money.
Yeah.
But we really weren't producing anything. We were just coming up with these various, again, legal. I never had anybody go to jail, never had any real problems like that. But it was very frustrating to me because I would have clients in various parts of the country who would be investors in some of these projects who would get audited. And literally in one time, I think it was 3 different clients got 3 vastly different results from an audit.
Whoa.
Same situation. And then I would see the Money Magazine stories back when they could get people to do it, where they would have accounting firms do a hypothetical tax return, and they'd have 50 of them, and they get 50 different answers.
Wow.
And
crazy.
And it became obvious that nobody understood the code, that really nobody could comply because nobody knew what it meant to comply with anything more than the very, very basic, I made this money, I took a standard deduction, and I pay this % of tax.
Yes.
But if you made it any more complex than that, you had lots and lots of things. And I thought to myself, what a total waste. Plus, the IRS tended to be, in some cases, much too heavy-handed and much more arbitrary. I mean, All tax preparers, even today, will tell you stories about some IRS, not all, but some, who will go do an audit and they will maybe not find anything particularly disturbing, but because they don't want to leave with no money collected, they'll make a determination and they'll say, well, I'm disallowing A, B, and C. I had a client call me, a friend of mine actually called me. He had an audit. He has a business. He'd had an audit. He'd had to pay his accountant, his CPA, to come to the audit. The agent showed up, stayed only for a short time and wasn't really ready and rescheduled it. Of course, he had to repay the CPA again. And they went through it. A few months later, a couple of months later, they get a deficiency notice for I think it was $1,800. And he asked the CPA, he says, what is this? I thought you said that we were okay. And he says, well, you are. So it's totally bogus, but you should pay it. He goes, what do you mean? That's contradictory. And he says, no, it's not, because for us to fight this, it's going to cost you a lot more than $1,800.
Crazy. Wow.
And of course, he was absolutely angry and whatever. And he called me up and he said, this totally tells me again why we need to go to a system like the fair tax, which is simply a national retail sales tax.
Yeah. So basically, all it generally means is that instead of having federal income, where it's taken out of your paycheck every year and taken and given to the federal government, this is just your tax on all sales, no matter it's small, big, milk, boat, whatever it is. All of it gets a sales tax.
All retail sales, Christina. This is the real key, because if you're looking at a business, they're making all kinds of purchases that go into their product that is then sold to the public. We're only taxing once, and that's at the retail level.
Got it.
So what we've done is we've eliminated collection of taxes for many, many companies who do not sell at retail. They make things that go into products that are later sold at retail. And so we've made their lives much simpler, because we are funding the Social Security system, the income tax, both corporate and individual, the estate and gift tax, all through a 23% retail sales tax that has a tax credit built in that allows all of the purchases for a family up to the poverty level for that family to be tax-free. So literally what you've done is taken a family, like as an example, let's say you have a family making $30,000 a year. And there are 4 of them, mother and father and 2 children. All of their purchases at $2,500 a month would effectively be tax-free. They would get a credit check each month for what their taxes would have been on the $2,500. So they go out and they buy things. They're increased in price by the sales tax, but they've already been paid for that increase. So they make these purchases without any impact of taxes. It's a monthly basis. Under the present system, you've got an income tax. Now at $30,000, honestly, they're going to pay almost zero income tax, but they're going to pay payroll tax, 7.65%, because that is the most regressive tax we have, because it starts at $0 and goes up. And everybody pays it regardless of family size, and it cuts off at $120,000. So you've got a tax that's eliminated, but under the present system, that same family of 4 that was making $30,000 would pay around $2,300 in federal Social Security and Medicare tax. So their spending would be reduced. Whereas under the fair tax, they'd be able to take advantage of every dime they made. Plus, there isn't anyone who disputes that if you take away the $400 or $500 billion a year of complexity of charges that are added to the cost of things for compliance, and if you take away all of the markups that are included in products because of people having had to pay income tax, that the prices aren't going to come down 10 to 15%. So the people who are making the lower income, it applies to all of us, but that same family is going to find that their $30,000 is probably going to buy goods equivalent to $35,000 in today's situation. So they have a win-win thing because they've increased their ability to consume from $27,000 to $35,000. It's a huge benefit for lower income people.
Yeah.
And it allows that to happen without having to have 10 federal programs and all the overhead and all this. And so what you would have is it really, really simple. You know, did you sell the product? Yes. Did you collect the sales tax? If the answer is yes, then pay it to the government. If the answer is no, then you owe it. It's not like these wild discussions we used to have on what's definition of income and what's deductible and what isn't. All that goes away, Christina.
How do you keep track of businesses that have sales? Maybe they sell products, maybe they sell information. How do you make sure that businesses stay on top of their sales tax and pays it, and that they are actually reporting proper numbers? Is there a way to keep totals on that somehow?
Well, actually, a lot of that's been taken care of by the mega companies, the Amazons, the big box stores. Over 90% of the sales in this country at the retail level are made by less than 10% of the vendors.
Whoa, that's amazing.
Yeah. And well, if you think about it, you know, it's the big car dealers, it's Amazon, it's Walmart, it's Target.
Yeah. And now that you mentioned
big grocery stores.
Yeah. And now that you mentioned it, I mean, I go to the local grocery store, but to do a lot of the things around the house, I get it on Amazon like everyone else. It's amazing how Amazon's become, you know, you need something, have it delivered to your house via Amazon. This sounds great, but I can't imagine why anyone would oppose it. It would help the low income the most, but I think we would all benefit. Is there any parties in the country that really oppose it, and why?
Well, a lot of the people in D.C., I call it the D.C. elites, really don't like this. And they don't like it for several reasons. One is most of them have been able to create a situation where I wrote an article saying they need a dictionary because on July 4th, when we talked about the Declaration of Independence, it said all men are created equal and entitled to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. Well, their definition of all is them and their friends. Oh. And the rest of us, if it happens to help us, that's fine, but mostly it's theirs. And inalienable is, yes, it can't be taken away unless it would hurt me or my friends, and then it can be. So you've got a lot of people who have decided that they need to benefit, and not only Democrats, Republicans as well, who are setting up there either companies that have carved out special benefits, or whether it's a lobbyist, whether it's a member of Congress. All of these people really don't like it. You know, a member of Congress, a lot of them are really concerned because, Christina, under the fair tax, we would be increasing the awareness of Congress spending because now almost nobody has a clue what they pay in tax. But if you're going to expand to all the consumers, and that would be 99 point whatever percent of us, all of us are consumers, and multiple times a day we would see the cost of the federal government on our purchase. And everybody is going to start saying, why is it so high? And they're all going to look at it and say, you know, and I'm talking about the person who's getting government subsidy, the person on Social Security, the person who's my grandson who goes into a store to get something and needs more money because he needs to pay the sales tax. They're all going to ask about it. And you're going to have a lot of attention. And you're also going to have a situation, Christina, where somebody says right now, oh, the Department of Education costs too much. Well, nobody really has a clue what that means to them on a tax bill.
Yeah.
But under the sales tax, all you got to do is look at the percentage being spent on the Department of Education and the percentage of the sales tax. And you say, well, it would reduce the sales tax 0.2% or whatever. You can actually see it. I mean, it's real. It's very simple. And gosh, that scares these guys tremendously.
And you know what's interesting? A number of years ago, a number of my friends from my old job all got laid off at the same time. There was a big management change, and a lot of them couldn't find immediate work, and they just started to go into contracting or doing a totally different business on the side. And so I could totally see what you're saying. As jobs change in careers and things become more automated, you don't really need to have your employees there. You can just hire vendors.
That's what's happening. And plus, one of the unintended consequences of Obamacare is that you don't have to work for a big company to get health benefits now.
Oh, that's true. Yeah.
You know, and a lot of the reason why people stayed with the old company style was because of the benefit packages. Well, now a lot of people can get covered on their own or through their own little groups or whatever. And this has allowed more mobility. Plus, a lot of the younger people think they're bulletproof and they don't need insurance. So they go out and they do this. But that's why when I met with Paul Ryan, and I mentioned this to him, and he said, yes, well, don't you think, though, Steve, that when you do the kind of changes that I think we need to do in the income tax code, and when you change the rates and bring it down and make it simpler and make it where it's fair, don't you think evasion's going to come down? And I said, well, Paul, I think that's probably a good start, but I have to be honest, I think it's too late. Because if you've got a person who is evading income tax, it's normally not on all their income. It's normally on a portion, like a person making what should be $100,000 a year is reporting 80. Because they're either increasing donation or deductions, or they're not reporting cash or whatever. And so on that $20,000 a year, they're paying zero taxes, state and federal.
Wow.
And what you're talking about, Paul, let's say you bring the rate on the taxes down to 15% on the income tax. So that person's going to be happy that his other 80 is taxed lower, but he's also avoiding Social Security, which in most cases is 15.3 because they're independent contractors. And he's also not paying state. And in some states, it could be 6, 7%, 8%. So what you have is a situation where a person who's paying zero now, you're going to say, all right, I'm going to let you pay 35% instead of zero. So I'm going to have you pay $6,500 or zero on that 20. I said, now he's already made the decision, or she, that it's okay to cheat. So why are they going to come back into the system? And he looked at me and he says, well, you know, and he's actually a very nice man.
Yeah.
And very charming to talk to. And he looked at me and he said, all right, you know, sort of, all right, smart guy, what's the solution? And I said, honestly, the only solution that I know that would even start to stop it would be change from auditing 0.7% and start auditing 3, 4, 5, 6%. Start putting more than 2,000 people a year in jail and make the penalty so draconian that it's not going to happen. And I said, but the problem of that is that about 20% of the people are evading now. They don't self-identify, Christina. They don't write a big, you know, red letter on their return saying, hey, I'm cheating. Okay. Which means that the IRS is going to have to audit 100%, and the other 80% who are trying to do the right thing are going to be subjected to these draconian type audits. And I said, Paul, you're going to get all kinds of phone calls. Do you want those?
to me, having a sales tax on retail is so fair because let's say it's 8% right here in New York right now. We have a sales tax of 8.75, I believe. But even if it was 10% down the line, it would hardly increase what we're buying already. We wouldn't notice it that much, and then we wouldn't have that big decrease on our salary every 2 weeks or every month or whenever it is that you
That's right.
get a paycheck. And I think some people will be, oh, my milk now costs $4.50 more, instead of $4. But hey, at the end, you look at all the extra money you're getting in your paycheck, $100, $200, $1,000, whatever it is. It would definitely, I think, increase the lifestyle for many Americans. How do we even get on? How do we get this started? Because you said that there's going to be a lot of opposition from Capitol Hill. What can citizens do to get it started?
Well, here's what I look at.
Mm-hmm.
If you are taking and you're talking to your member of Congress, and that's where it's got to start.
Mm-hmm.
I think you ask a couple of things. One is when they say, well, people don't like sales taxes. And you say, well, don't we have something like that now? Because from an economic point of view, Christina, in a business point of view,
mm-hmm.
anytime you take any money out of my earnings, you've reduced my ability to consume.
Mm-hmm.
I can't print money. I can only spend what I make.
Yeah.
And so an income tax and payroll tax system pre-taxes my consumption because it takes the money out before I get it. A retail sales tax doesn't take the money out. It gives you your money, but it taxes you at your point of consumption.
Mm-hmm.
So right now, people say, well, Steve, doesn't that mean that loaf of bread I'm paying $1 for now is going to cost $1.25? And I say, yes, but what are you really paying for that loaf of bread? And they say, oh, I'm paying $1. And I said, okay, but what did you have to earn to have all the taxes taken out to net $1? $1.25, $1.30, $1.50, depends on your brackets, but it's more because you are already paid a sales tax.
And here's the thing, it gives the power, it gives you, the consumer, the power. So, because I know myself, I consume not just the essentials, but we often buy things that are non-essential. And now when we have the money up front and not taken from the government, and taken an IRS, federal tax, now I can decide how do I want to use it. Do I want to use this much for food and this much for fun stuff? But I get to choose where all my money goes, and then it's taxed at that level. And I know where it's taxed, and I know how much money things are going to cost.
You're treated like an adult.
Yeah,
because
exactly.
You can't. And what I think happens, and this is something that I've already warned Kevin Brady's office, and I've told Ryan's office, and I'm doing that, is if we can do this, and I'm going to ask people like you to help me when we get into the next year primary.
Yes.
I want all of these members to be confronted at a town hall with this question and with letters and phone calls. Mr. or Mrs. Congressperson, do you believe in enforcing the law of the land? Absolutely. Do you believe in enforcing immigration laws? Absolutely. Do you believe in enforcing, drug laws? If it's on the books, we enforce it. Good. So if you believe in enforcing the law, do you believe in enforcing the income tax laws? Absolutely. Well, then, are you familiar with the studies? Even the IRS say it's going to be $5 trillion over 10 years, and this was a 5-year-old study. But assuming that Sabula is right, it's $9 trillion. How are you planning to enforce the law when you've got that much evasion? How are you going to do it? And none of them are going to want to say the only thing that possibly could do that, which is, I'm going to increase the IRS size. I'm going to empower them to come after you. I'm going to empower them to collect. I'm going to empower them to be very, very draconian. And I'm going to enforce it. And I'm going to enforce it against 100% of the people, even though only 20% are cheating. Because that's the problem. If you're voting to reduce the size, and Brady has bragged about that, the chairman of the Ways and Means, how he's reducing the IRS, reducing audits. Well, what is he going to do about evasion?
Yeah.
And we've got a study that we're supposed to get in the next month showing evasion under the fair tax, which again will be much, much less for the reasons that I told you, and because when a retailer, even a small retailer, buys something, they have under the state law, they have a resale permit. And Christina, all you've got to do is match the resale permit with how much you sold at retail and compare it to the others. I mean, these states have models of similar stores in demographic areas. They know what you should be paying. You're not, how many people can go to Walmart and say, oh, don't charge me sales tax?
Exactly. Or when you go to the grocery store, just leave out the tax. Well, that doesn't happen like that. So yeah, this would definitely cut down on tax evasion. Now, one part of this program that I mentioned to you at the beginning of this interview that is very pertinent is really to touch on some of the things that really touch all of our listeners and the entire country, and is really crucial at the moment. What do you find is the biggest issue facing our country? Probably taxes, but is there anything in specifically that we really need to address in this country?
We need, in my opinion, to get back into a situation where people are looking at what actually works for the country, not what actually works for them. We've allowed a system to develop, and I say it's in D.C., but it's also in every state house and in many city municipalities in their government house, where we've created a culture where a lot of people just believe if it works for them, it's good, as opposed to where it should be, does it work for the greatest number of people? And you can say that with economics. You have people who profit greatly from the income tax, but look how much it hurts all of us. You have people who profit greatly from enforcement of education spending, but they don't get the results that they should. And they fight efforts that would undermine their position, even though it may be much better for our children. And you've got that example all through our society. You've got people who have decided that it's good if it's good for them and their friends. Whereas what we need is a society where people are looking at and saying, well, it's good if it's good for me, yes, but it's also got to be good for Christina. It's got to be good for my neighbors, because we're all in the same boat.
Yeah. Like one negotiator told me, the best negotiation is when you see the win for both sides, not just one side, not just your side. And I think to touch on that, what would really help us go forward is the people who are in these positions, not just to look out for yourself or your friends, but also for the voters and the people who are putting them into office, to also hold their officers accountable when they see certain things going on. I think many have told me that they don't really see that they have a say in politics, or why bother? But if we all say that, then things stay the same. But if
that's what they're counting on, Christine.
Yeah, that's what they're counting on. Stay quiet, go home, watch TV. Exactly.
Yes.
Absolutely. And people can find out more about fair tax at fairtax.org, correct?
Yes, ma'am. Just go to fairtax.org. We've got information. We would love to have people join us. We are going to be very active, not only this fall, but going into the next election campaign, because we believe we have an alternative that will vastly improve the economy, vastly put freedom back in our hands and put power of choice back, as well as stop the evasion that is going on that's really going to cripple this whole system. So thank you very much, though.
This has been fascinating. This has been an absolute fascinating talk. I want to thank you again for coming to share your vast wisdom today on Savvy Business Radio. Thank you.
Thank you, Christina.
Hi,
Hi, Jon. Welcome to Savvy Business Radio for our Heartbeat of the World segment. I'm so grateful to have you here. We interviewed your fellow Fair Tax guy, Stephen Hayes, earlier this week, and we're grateful to have you here. You work at Fair Tax as a treasurer, executive committee CEO, and we're grateful to have you come talk about your perspective on tax and finance in this country. One of the things that came up as a big concern for our audience and the country was really the financial state we're in. It's really atrocious right now, and we need good people like you and President Trump to help us get out of this big mess that we've gotten ourselves in. And so before we go to all of the deep issues, let's share with the audience a little bit about your background. What brought you to working in finances and ultimately working with fairtax.org?
Sure. Well, it's great to be here, Christina. Thank you for having me. I'm grateful for the opportunity to chat with you today. My background is in finance. I am the co-leader of a private equity business in Dallas called Satori Capital, and I volunteer on the executive committee, as you said, for Americans for Fair Taxation, because I believe that tax reform has the ability to have such incredible impact on our country at scale, more than even people realize. We're focusing on the issue in general in the media these days.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's so true. I mean, I think we get sidetracked by a lot of silly issues that are really not pertinent to the everyday issues that we all face. Finances being one of them. It touches every part of our life, whether we want to admit it or not. Prices go up, inflation, we all suffer. Tell us now, I know Stephen Hayes went a little bit deeper into the whole structure of fairtax.org, but share a little bit about how this could really affect our country on a whole.
Sure. Well, if you really zoom out, what you'll find is that our income tax system is an incredibly inefficient tax collection system. And if you were to sort of eliminate all of that waste, all of that inefficiency, you'd find that you'd save at least $1 trillion per year for the country. And you mentioned debt, and just think about all of the good uses that you could put $1 trillion per year to. And that's really comprised of sort of three, what I've heard of as three sources. It's compliance costs, filing your 1040 or paying someone to do so on April 15th and all of your other tax documents for individuals and businesses. It's tax evasion, what I call sort of not reporting an honest activity, right? The underreporting of an honest activity. And then the last piece is sort of the underground economy, which is, not reporting an illegal activity. When you add up those three buckets, you're at about $1 trillion per year. And that's just the kind of dollars that could have massive impact on our system. So the income tax system, incredibly inefficient. As many politicians and others have been saying, we need to shift to a much more simple and fair system. And part of that is eliminating the $1 trillion per year. I don't think most Americans don't realize that the dollars at stake are that significant in terms of waste and the inefficiency of the current system.
Yeah, and I don't think they realize that a system like this, fair tax, would actually allow everyone in the country to benefit for the most part and to actually keep most of the money they earn. I mean, really, that's what it's supposed to be about. You go out there, you put in a good day's work, or you create something that's valuable and someone pays you for it, and you get to keep most of what you earn, not give it to some government organization or have it taken and used about. Now, for the people who work in organizations, say like IRS or TurboTax, I'm having a feeling they're not going to like this too much because they're going to be like, we're going to be out of business. What do you say to them? I'm thinking they're going to be like, hey, wait a second, my job.
Yeah, it's funny. The actually, the head of the IRS actually is on record recently as saying that the income tax system is incredibly inefficient and it needs to be changed. So it's kind of funny that somebody in a role like that, would even come out in favor of significant tax reform. And he's supposed to be a very neutral figure who isn't supposed to opine on one tax system or the other. But he's even said, that we need significant tax reform. To the others, tax preparers, that's the one group that will be sort of negatively impacted in the short run from a traditional sense. In other words, their services really won't be needed in the form as they exist today. They will no longer be preparing federal income tax returns because, as you know, fair tax replaces all all federal taxes.
Mm-hmm.
However, as we can talk about in a couple of minutes, fair tax will so stimulate the economy that the need for financially savvy people, such as those who are good with numbers and preparing federal income tax returns every year, will increase so significantly that these people will have opportunities to take more interesting jobs that are higher paying. So when you look at it in a vacuum, yes, those groups will not be happy. But in reality, it's about 67,000 full-time equivalent Americans that can easily be redeployed, as I said, into much more interesting and productive and higher paying jobs. Because of the growth of the economy, companies will be looking for people who are good with numbers.
And also, I'm a business owner, as a lot of people listening into our show are as well. And this will impact them in that, a lot of us have to hire HR crew to go through and do payroll taxes and stuff like that. And it takes a significant amount of business resources often to do all of the taxes. And so I think this will also free up a lot of businesses to not spend money in those areas.
No doubt about it. As you know, the fair tax is collected at the register, so to speak, just like state sales taxes. And so those compliance costs that I referred to that comprise a portion of the $1 trillion of waste, that's exactly what you were just referring to, is all of the resources invested by businesses to comply with the tax code. It's really incredible. In one of my prior positions, I was a senior advisor to Rudy Giuliani in New York with his firm. And I said to him at some point, I was his sort of CFO and COO for part of my time with him. And, I said to him at one point, Mayor, you can't believe how much you pay me to just sort of file paperwork for you and create no actual value. It's just compliance. And so, yes, businesses will benefit significantly from the elimination of all of that waste. Not to mention that, acquiring talent, hiring people will be much less expensive, because currently, of course, there's income taxes and there's the payroll taxes. There's the employer portion of payroll taxes. And that just drives up the costs, which of course are passed through down into the prices of goods, raising the prices of goods for all consumers. So the demand will increase dramatically for the services and products that businesses produce as well.
Yeah, and just the everyday folks. We were talking to Stephen Hayes last week about how now you'll get to go home with more of your paycheck. And then think about this. On top of that, every year you're going to TurboTax or H&R Block. And how much money was I spending? I know I was spending quite a bit of money every year for my business, putting through my taxes and such. That cost will not exist. And because you won't have to figure out, do I subtract Y from Z and what, add and subtract. I'd look at the tax form and said, I'm not even going to try to figure this out because I'm going to mess it up and then we get audited. So I'm just sending it away. And that headache and all that cost will go away for the average consumer out there.
Yeah, and I'm by the way, a CPA. Okay, if this tells you anything, I'm a CPA who pays someone to file my taxes. What does that say about the complexity of the tax code, right? I mean, there is no more simple tax code and tax collection system than a retail level sales tax, which fair tax is. You don't hear people complaining about how difficult it is to pay state sales taxes when they buy a pair of shoes at Walmart, right? Much more simple system than the income tax system and all the paperwork that goes along with it.
Absolutely. And you mentioned prior to the interview that this will also kind of fit in the fairtax.org, and in implementing it will really fit in with a lot of the plans that President Trump has to really further and to enhance and fix our severe financial issues in this country. Share a little bit about that.
Sure. Yeah. Fair tax lines up so well with a lot of the principles he's laid out as what he wants to see in the next tax reform. And we really just have to figure out how to reach him and get him a little educated and get his team educated, because he has the potential to be such a vocal spokesperson to educate the American public, who can then in turn put pressure on Congress to really bring fair tax into the debate. But in terms of how it lines up, he's outlined a handful of principles: revenue neutrality, of course, border adjustability, repatriating $2.5 trillion of U.S. companies' profits trapped overseas, tax evasion he wants to eliminate, tax inversions he wants to eliminate, where companies sort of get, U.S.-based companies are acquired by a foreign-based company, and then the combined organization pays taxes at the foreign company rate, which is typically much lower than the U.S. corporate rate. So that's sort of a form of tax evasion as well. Economic growth. We can come back to any one of these if you like. I'm just sort of rattling off a list of 6 to 8 things. It permanently funds Social Security and Medicare, and it discourages illegal immigration. So those are 7 or 8 things that we can touch on each of them if you like, and go deeper. But I mean, just all of those fair tax lines up with perfectly, and there's no other system that's being discussed that addresses all of those points like fair tax does.
Wow. Now, how would it kind of hinder illegal immigration? Would people not, would they be hit, immigrants, further with sales tax and they weren't before? Because I know in New York we already have a tax, 8.75, I believe. But how would that work?
So it would bring illegal immigrants into the system. So currently they exist outside the system, right? They don't have a Social Security number. They're not paid, on the record. They're paid off the record with cash. And fair tax would bring them into the system because they would be paying taxes on all the goods and services they purchase while they're here. And so right now they exist in what I called earlier in that third bucket, the underground economy. Fair tax would bring them in the system and cause them to be contributors to the tax system and paying their fair share as well.
Yeah. This is awesome because actually we were discussing earlier that this is really what you purchase, you pay on, and that's it. You pay a tax on whatever you decide to purchase, whether you're poor, rich, or not. And also, Stephen Hayes went into the fact that, if you're a family of 4 and you're very, very poor, there would be a certain limit where you would get the money back. So this wouldn't hurt the super poor where they'd have more money coming out of their pocket or something. This would actually enhance their lives and put more money into their pockets.
That's exactly right. Yeah, fair tax, it's sort of the rising tide lifts all boats solution. Everyone is better off. Every economic class is better off. It's one of the great things about fair tax. Unlike the other tax reform systems, it is not a rob Peter to pay Paul system. There aren't winners and losers, right? It's not like the rich are better off at the expense of the poor, or the middle class is better off at the expense of the rich. The $1 trillion per year we mentioned earlier goes back into the pockets of Americans. We're eliminating waste. We're not taking capital from one group and giving it to another. We're eliminating that waste, putting it in the pockets of Americans. So yes, the poor, exactly right, are better off just as the rich are, just as the middle class are. And one of the ways I'm sure you and Steve have chatted about that the poor are better off, or the lower income are better off, is via the prebate, which is the check that the government would issue to every American at the beginning of the month that would be equal to the fair tax on the poverty level of spending. So you receive a check, and every American receives this. And so essentially the first, pick a number, $40,000 of spending, let's say that's poverty level spending for a family of 4. You have the cash in your pocket, you go to the register to buy your food, clothing, and shelter, and you've already got the cash to pay the tax that's charged at the register. So on a net basis, you are living on a completely untaxed way. And every dollar you spend above the poverty level of spending, as you sort of shift into the middle class level of spending or the wealthy level of spending, you are paying the retail sales tax. And your effective rate, the average rate that you're paying on all of your spending, including the first $40,000 in our example, continues to increase until it's close to the maximum 23% retail sales tax that is the fair tax.
That is awesome. And it occurred to me when you were mentioning all the different ways that companies and different ways that people are evading taxes right now, it occurred to me for the businesses that either go abroad or, shift their money so that they don't end up having to pay taxes, I'm thinking they might have a problem with the fair tax because, hey, it is fair, but I'd rather pay nothing as opposed to something. And I'm thinking there might be opposition from that side. And as businesses often contribute to campaigns and such. Will this have an impact of this getting passed and getting through as a bill?
Because of politicians and legislators who will be objecting to it. Yeah, I mean,
Well, not just
certainly.
them, but I'm thinking businesses, because often big business
Oh,
feeds into the campaigns of the officials that get into office. And if they say, hey, I could shift my money overseas and not pay any taxes, why would I want to have this created? I'll stop it at the front end by paying some politician and saying, hey, I'll pay for your campaign, but you can't pass the fair tax
yeah.
bill or something. Yeah.
Yeah, a couple of things. So first of all, corporations can shift corporate income tax burdens overseas, but they certainly can't shift payroll taxes overseas, right? So there's still a fair amount of tax that they're essentially paying, the employer portion of those payroll taxes. And then second, demand for their goods and services, as we touched on earlier, will increase dramatically, because currently embedded in the price of all of the goods and services that companies produce are taxes, including those payroll taxes. And so the prices of their goods and services that we consumers all buy is higher than it needs to be. And if you remove those embedded taxes from the prices of those goods and services, the prices of those goods and services will decline before adding on the fair tax. And so you will have increased demand. Important to note that after adding the fair tax to the price of those goods and services and removing the embedded taxes, prices are slightly higher. However, as you pointed out, all workers keep their gross wages. And so on a net basis, when you look at the purchasing power that a consumer will have combined, the increased purchasing power, which is significant, combined with a slight increase in after-tax prices, you have more net purchasing power that will drive demand up. That's good for businesses.
Yeah, because then people go out and buy more, and then hence businesses will make more money. This really is a win-win situation. It's really just getting the public educated on all the aspects of how it'll help every single portion of the society. This is awesome. And we talked and touched on a little bit before the interview how this show really brings about touching all the greatest issues that face this nation the most. And one of the things we got back was, it's a big concern for everyone hitting their wallet, was finances. And you have a unique, keen sense of this, working in finance all your life. What do you see as the greatest financial threat, or maybe you see a whole new threat that faces the country? What's your perspective?
I actually think it's tax reform, and you might have guessed that, given how passionate I am about fair tax. But this has the ability, as we talked about earlier, to have great impact at scale. This will stimulate the economy so significantly. It will change the power of the United States on a global scale relative to China and the other growing economic powers. Think about what happens here as a corporation under a fair tax system decides, as an example, where to build a manufacturing plant. Currently, the option is to pay the high corporate taxes in the U.S., pay those payroll taxes, capital gains taxes, et cetera, or establish it overseas where there are lower corporate income taxes. So currently, the decision is to establish that plant overseas, or with tax inversions, essentially shift your corporate tax burden overseas. Under fair tax, the decision is very different, because there are no payroll taxes, there are no corporate income taxes. So the tax burden to starting and building a new plant in the U.S. Is zero. And so all of a sudden, the capital allocation decisions that corporations are going to make becomes very simple, and it's, let's build our plants in the United States. In turn, think about the impact that has on job creation, right? All of the workers in those plants are going to be needed now, and the demand for labor is going to skyrocket, which is going to put more dollars in workers' pockets. That in turn is going to convert into more spending, which is good for business, and all of a sudden the economy is on fire. And so that again lines up with one of Trump's objectives. He's targeting 3% GDP growth. The CBO and the other organizations that evaluate the different tax plans have all said none of them allow him to achieve that. Fair tax does allow him to achieve that. So this is great for everyone, and makes causes the U.S. economy to just grow so rapidly because of these corporate capital allocation decisions, which will, for the first time, favor, let me invest capital in the United States rather than somewhere overseas.
Yeah, this is interesting because I've talked to a number of businesses, and one business said to me, I don't want to have to bring my business overseas. I really, really don't. But at the tax rate and all the money I'm spending here, I just can't keep my business afloat. It's something I just have to do. And then I think about this. I had a talk with one of my friends who owns a business. He said, if I'm working with people, say in the Philippines, they don't, I mean, they speak English at these organizations, but they don't have the handle. They're not on location of my company. I have to send them the invoices online, and I have to talk them through. It's sometimes more cumbersome for their clients, for the business owner. It's not something, I think a lot of people think businesses just shift their business overseas because they're greedy, and that's really not the case. They'd rather be here locally where it would serve everyone a lot easier, but it's the money and the cost that keeps them from having to go across the pond.
No doubt. And think about the slippery slope that results from what you just referred to. As one company or individual, shifts the tax burden, or he sort of avoids. I won't use the term evades here, although that's certainly part of the equation. But avoids paying taxes in the U.S. either legally or illegally, whether by evasion illegally, or legally by, as we talked about, sort of tax inversions or shifting production overseas or what have you. What does that do for everyone who's still remaining and paying their quote unquote fair share of the taxes? It's increasing it. So every time, one by one, a company makes a decision like that, it's raising the per capita taxes on the rest of us. And so then what are you going to do if now your taxes go up, but you have received no additional services for it? You're going to start considering, well, let me try to avoid paying this tax. And you just get one company after the other avoiding that tax and increasing the burden on the remaining population that's paying a fair share. It's a death spiral. I mean, it will come to an end at some point, and it won't end well. And so we've got to stop that now.
Absolutely. Now, how do you think this ever became so complicated? It really boggles my mind because I've attempted to pay taxes and stuff in the past years, but it's so cumbersome to understand all the rules, and they keep changing. Why has it become this complicated?
Politics is the short answer. Our income tax, the old politics. The current income tax system started as a flat income tax, a very simple to understand system, believe it or not.
Wow.
And then what happens? You let legislators and politicians have at it, right? And you give them the opportunity to use the tax code to essentially buy votes, right? By giving out tax breaks to their constituencies, who then in turn make political contributions to their campaigns and their PACs. So how does that think about those incentives, right? So the income tax code becomes this incredible weapon for politicians to retain their jobs. And that's one of the problems here, because politicians, legislators, Congress, they're really not motivated to be out there educating American voters on the benefits of fair tax, because it will take power away from them. Fair tax would be one of the greatest transfers of power from politicians to the American people we've ever seen. And that's why the American people don't know so much about it, because politicians want to keep it hush-hush.
Well, then really it behooves all of the citizens to learn about it, but then I guess to vote. And I know that Stephen Hayes had mentioned this, that we go out there and vote, but if but if a good portion of the people running are like, heck, but I want to protect my job, so I'll just pretend to tell them I'll help them out, and then I'll get in office and I'll do it, as we often see a lot of politicians do. They're, oh yes, I'm going to enact this and enact that, and then they get in office and they don't do what they say they're going to do. How can we hold our politicians accountable for not only when they're running and campaigning, but once they get in office?
Yeah, it's very difficult. I mean, you can obviously limit them to a single term, because that sort of transactional approach that you just described, where politicians go back on the word, that people will find them out over time, right? So that's one way. But how do you hold them accountable in the short run, in that first term? It's very difficult. I mean, the political system really doesn't work to the voters' advantage the way it's currently structured. The pay-to-play game is a very, very real part of the American political system. And while we have a great system relative to many around the world, it's still broken in a lot of ways. So I don't have a good answer for you on that one.
Yeah. Well, I think the first step is really education, and that's what we're doing here today. And I'm grateful that you came to share your wisdom. This is really insightful. I hope it'll just perk people up. I mean, listen, if all the people, business owners or otherwise, can actually keep more of their earnings, more of their hard work in their pocket, I'm sure everyone would be on board here listening in today. What can they do to get started to maybe educate their politicians, perhaps?
Yeah, first go to fairtax.org and get yourself educated on fair tax, and then start contacting your local congressperson. This needs to be a grassroots effort. It's hard work, but it's the only way it's going to get done for the reasons we talked about sooner. And this is something that is good for, as you said, everybody, including whether you're a Republican or Democrat, right? Because as we talked about, tax burden will decline for everyone. So Republicans love lower taxes. Democrats love a progressive tax system. This is the only system that accomplishes both and can bring both parties together. So contact your congressman, whether he or she is a Republican or a Democrat, and just start demanding that they consider fair tax. We are trying to run social media district targeting campaigns. We put a lot of pressure via social media on particular Republicans and Democrats who we think are vulnerable, but it takes the grassroots effort. It takes the masses. Either that, or we need to come at it from the top and have Donald Trump mandate that Congress consider fair tax. And so as an organization, we're working on that as well.
Oh, great. And so I'd also implore everyone to really, as you said, really educate yourself. Go on to fairtax.org and then go talk to everyone you know. Tell them to educate themselves, educate them, and let's just spread the word like wildfire and get everyone on the boat. Because if everyone's out there screaming and hollering this, they got to start listening to us.
Yeah, that's right. And there's a good Q&A section on the website. There are a lot of typical criticisms of fair tax that just simply aren't true, such as, sales taxes are regressive. As we talked about, because of the prebate, it's not regressive, it's progressive. And the list goes on, and people can really educate themselves on the website and be prepared when their friends, family, congressmen respond with criticisms that just aren't true. So that's the place to start.
Yay. Well, thank you so much. This is fabulous, wonderful wisdom. I'm so grateful you came out here, Jon, to share your great wisdom today on Savvy Business Radio for our Heartbeat of the World segment. Thank you so much.
It's great to be here, Christina. Have a great day.
Here's an excerpt of our interview for next week with Kate Cameron on women making their mark in a male-dominated tech and science world. Yeah. And it's interesting, we talked before the interview, and I filled you in a little bit about my background. I'm not a pilot, but I was a student pilot for a number of 7 years ago. I took some flying lessons, and it was amazing to me how few women enter into that industry, into the flying aeronautics industry. And it's just like the science and mathematics industry. Women generally stay away from those industries. And I even thought it was quite funny, Kate. I would go to the flying school, and one time I left the flight school in the evening and went to the nearest bus stop, and there was a guy there, and he said, "Oh, you're at the flight school?" I said, yeah. He said, "Oh, so you're studying to be a flight attendant?" I'm like, "No,
oh my gosh.
I'm studying to actually fly the airplane." But I thought it was funny because his first initial, and this was just 6 or 7 years ago, his initial response is, "You must be at the flight school to learn to be a stewardess or a flight attendant, not to fly an airplane." And I thought, wow, in the year 2000s, you think people would have realized or even consider that women could be in flying. But even today, it's not thought of as number one.
It isn't. I'm actually surprised he didn't ask you if you were waiting for your boyfriend or husband to finish up.
Oh, don't worry. I've gotten that too. What is your take, Kate, on why so few women enter these industries?
I think honestly, and this is going to harken back to my education, but I really do think it has to do with the socialization. I think this is flattening. I have hope for the current group of children coming up that we've become aware, and the people in education and the people who are socializing them are noticing that this incredible gender bias exists. But unfortunately, I think until this current generation, we didn't see that. So you started with children in early education being passed over. There was a study done not too long ago, actually, that there was just an observational study in grammar school, and they were watching teachers in science and math classes literally pass over girls with their hands up in the air ready to answer the question to go to a boy who didn't have his hand up to answer the question. And it wasn't just an exception, it seemed to be a regular thing.
Savvy Business Radio runs in syndication on 8 AM/FM stations nationwide, including iHeartRadio and 6 podcasting platforms. To find out about our paid sponsorship opportunities or to become a guest and find out how we can help you get your message out in a bigger way, call 732-474-7375 or email Christina at savvybusinessradio.com.